Hello, everyone, and welcome to 60 Nightmares. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you into the shadows. I know many of you drift off to sleep while listening, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in. Let the world outside fade away, because the nightmares are waiting, and it all begins right here. Story 1, She Never Takes It Off. Beatrice Whitfield had worn her wedding ring for 40 years. Not once in all that time had it left her finger. Not for cleaning, not for swelling, not even after Harold's death. The ring had become part of her, a permanent circle of gold embedded in flesh. Friends had urged her, in the early years of grief, to take it off, to move on. But moving on had always felt like betrayal. The ring was her anchor, her proof that once she had belonged to someone, and that he had belonged to her. It was only 3 mornings ago that something changed. Beatrice, now 64, had stood at the bathroom sink, staring at the lace curtains filtering in pale Derbyshire sunlight. Her reflection was an older woman's, lined cheeks, silver hair, pale eyes that had seen too much. But her hand looked as it always had, thin, veined, with that stubborn band of gold. For decades, it hadn't budged, no matter the soap, no matter the oil. But lately, it had shifted, loose almost. She could feel it when she turned her hand, as though it no longer wanted to cling to her. And that morning, almost without thinking, she tried again. Just this once, she thought, just to clean it properly. The ring slid free. For the first time in 4 decades, the skin beneath tasted the air. She froze. That strip of flesh should have been pale, perhaps soft, but instead, it looked wrong. Grayish, shriveled, parchment dry, as though protected too long, preserved too long. A thin, unnatural smell rose with it, faintly sweet, faintly rotten. Beatrice's stomach lurched. Quickly, she pushed the ring back on, and when she did, the finger seemed to sigh. She told herself she was being silly. A ring left a mark. Everyone knew that. She made her tea, fed the neighbor's cat, read the paper. By afternoon, she convinced herself it had been a trick of the light, the paranoia of an old woman. But then the phone rang. Mrs. Whitfield? A woman's voice, professional, calm. This is Detective Inspector Caroline Fletcher, Derbyshire Police. I wonder if I might speak with you regarding your late husband, Harold Whitfield. Beatrice's teacup rattled in its saucer. Harold had been dead for 40 years. What on earth could there be to discuss? He died in 1983, she said. There was an inquest. Yes, ma'am. That's precisely why we need to speak. Some developments have arisen. I'd prefer to explain in person. Would this afternoon suit you? An hour later, Inspector Fletcher arrived. Tall, severe bun, eyes sharp but kind. They sat in Beatrice's sitting room, surrounded by framed photos of Harold. His face stared back at them from every wall. His walking boots, his soft smile, his dark hair forever young. 2 weeks ago, Fletcher began, hikers discovered human remains in a newly opened cave system near Winnet's Pass. The preservation was extraordinary. Temperature, mineral conditions. Through dental records, the remains have been identified as your husband. The words dropped like stones. Beatrice shook her head. That's impossible. My husband's body was found in 1983. He was buried. I attended the funeral. Yes, but that coffin was sealed. No one, not even you, saw his body. Which raises the question, who was buried in his place? Silence filled the room, broken only by the clock on the mantel, Harold's clock, which she still wound every Sunday. Fletcher hesitated. There is something else. The body in the cave is untouched by time. Not skeletal, not decomposed, preserved, as if he died yesterday. Beatrice pressed a trembling hand to her chest. She thought of the ring. She thought of her finger, gray and shriveled. She thought of the exact morning she'd removed it. Monday, the same day Harold had been found. But she could never tell the inspector that. That night, she could not sleep. She smelled something strange in the dark. Something sweet and cloying. Switching on the lamp, she stared at her hand. The strip of flesh beneath the ring had worsened. Bluish now, cracking, almost weeping. When she touched it, her fingertip came away damp. By morning, she went to see Dr. Holbrook. The doctor examined the finger with a frown. It looks like necrosis, she murmured. Tissue death. But the pattern, it's odd. When did this start? Yesterday, Beatrice admitted. After I removed my ring. The doctor made notes, masking her unease. I'll prescribe antibiotics, but I'd like you to see a specialist in Derby. And there's also someone from the university who'd like to speak with you. He specializes in unusual medical conditions. The police contacted him regarding your case. Our case, Beatrice thought, with a shiver. At home, she found herself staring again at Harold's photographs. He looked so young, so alive. She touched the ring, feeling it shift too easily now, as if the flesh beneath no longer had the strength to hold it. That night, the smell grew unbearable. She sat awake in her chair, listening to the house creak around her, the wind against the stone walls. At some point, she wasn't sure when, she thought she heard footsteps upstairs. Soft, familiar, and then a voice, low, close, almost against her ear. B, why did you take it off? Story 2. The Good Boy. Michael hadn't slept properly in weeks. Work had been grinding him down. The house felt emptier since his divorce, and his only real comfort came from Rex, his old German shepherd. Rex had been with him through everything. The move, the long nights, the silence. At 10 years old, the dog was slower, his muzzle silvering, but his loyalty never faltered. Every evening, Rex lay at the foot of Michael's bed, a living, breathing shield against loneliness. That night, though, something felt wrong. It was past midnight when the sound woke him. A thud downstairs, then the unmistakable creak of the kitchen door. Michael sat up in bed, heart hammering. For a moment, He thought he'd imagined it. The old house creaked often, but then came another sound, the scrape of something metallic against tile. Rex's ears pricked. The dog gave a low, rumbling growl deep in his chest. Michael whispered, "Good boy," and reached instinctively for the baseball bat under the bed. The growl turned into a snarl. Before Michael could react, Rex launched himself off the bed and tore down the stairs, nails clattering against wood. The noise downstairs erupted, shouting, a crash, the sound of flesh and fur colliding. Michael ran after him, bat raised. By the time he reached the bottom step, the intruder was already gone. The back door swinging open into the night. He saw only shadows fleeing into the darkness. The kitchen was in chaos. Chairs overturned, a smashed mug glittering across the floor. And Rex stood there, panting, his chest rising and falling, tail wagging faintly. A small streak of blood marked his shoulder, but he seemed unbothered. Michael dropped to his knees, hugging the dog tight. "Good boy. You saved me. You're the best boy." Rex licked his face, warm and reassuring, as if to say all was well. They went back upstairs. Michael couldn't stop shaking, but Rex curled against him on the bed. The dog rested his head on Michael's hand, licking it gently, rhythmically, until at last, Michael drifted into uneasy sleep. All through the night, every time he stirred, there was Rex, faithful, soothing, licking his hand in the darkness. It wasn't until morning that Michael noticed something was off. The bed was empty. He frowned, sitting up. Rex wasn't beside him. That was unusual. Rex never left his side for long. A faint smell reached his nose then, metallic and sour. With growing dread, Michael went downstairs. The kitchen was silent now, sunlight streaming through the cracked glass of the back door. And there, at the foot of the stairs, lay Rex. The dog's body was twisted, cold, and unmistakably lifeless. His fur was matted dark with blood. Michael staggered back, clutching the banister. His mind reeled. He dropped to his knees beside the body, sobbing, "No, no, no, you saved me, you can't." His words broke apart. He touched Rex's fur, already stiffening. But then the thought hit him like ice water. If Rex had died downstairs, then who or what had been in his bed all night licking his hand? Michael's gaze drifted upward, to the stairs leading back to his room. The house was silent, too silent. He remembered the steady, wet pressure against his skin, the reassuring rasp of a tongue, the warmth of a body beside him. It hadn't been Rex. Slowly, as if drawn by something stronger than himself, Michael lifted his left hand. A pale mark ringed his wrist, raw and glistening. The skin was abraded, as though something had been gnawing, chewing, savoring. The room tilted. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. He looked again at Rex's still body. The blood, the violence, it made sense now. Rex had fought. He had fought something Michael could not see, something that had come into the house with the intruder. Or perhaps something that had been waiting already in the dark corners. And then a sound broke the silence. Upstairs, a single, deliberate step. Michael froze. His mouth went dry. Slowly, his gaze shifted upward to the landing. There was nothing to see, just the dim hallway, the half-open bedroom door. But the sound had been unmistakable. Another step, and then, soft, wet, familiar, the sound of something licking. Story 3. The Visitor at 317. Margaret had lived alone for 12 quiet years since her husband's passing. She kept her days structured: tea at 8, gardening until noon, crosswords in the afternoon, and a single glass of sherry before bed. Life was predictable, calm. Nothing ever happened in her little cottage at the edge of town. Except at 317 every morning. It began subtly. She would wake in darkness, the digital clock glowing red numbers at her bedside. 317. Always the same. At first, she thought it was age. Bladder, nerves, maybe too much tea before bed. She would pad to the bathroom, return to bed, and drift back into uneasy dreams. But soon, she noticed something else. A sound. At exactly 317, a faint tap, tap, tap came from the front door. Not knocking, not urgent. Just 3 soft taps. Patient, almost polite. She told herself it was the wind. The third night, she crept to the top of the stairs, robe wrapped tight, and listened. The taps came again, deliberate. She peered through the dark hallway toward the frosted glass of the front door. A shadow seemed to stand just beyond it, unmoving. When she blinked, it was gone. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the end of the week, Margaret stopped pretending it was imagination. Always at 317. Always 3 taps. Always that shadow. As though someone waited patiently outside. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That a ghostly visitor kept polite appointments at her doorstep? That she was being haunted by punctuality? On the 8th night, she gathered courage. When the tapping began, she whispered into the darkness, "Who's there?" The cottage held its breath. No reply, no movement, just the faint outline of something behind the glass. And then, a voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even threatening. It was soft, like dry leaves brushing against each other. "Let me in, Margaret." Her blood froze. The voice was familiar. It was her husband's. She staggered back, hand pressed to her mouth. He'd been dead over a decade. She'd buried him. She'd stood at his grave. Yet the voice was unmistakable. "Henry," she whispered. "Let me in," the voice repeated, gentle, coaxing. Margaret's knees weakened. For one impossible moment, she wanted to believe. She wanted to rush down the stairs, throw the door wide, and see Henry's smiling face, to feel his arms again. But another part of her, the deeper, older instinct, screamed that what waited beyond the door was not her husband. She clutched the banister and forced herself upstairs, retreating to her bedroom. She covered her ears, but the voice continued, patient, unhurried. "Let me in, Margaret. Please, just open the door." When dawn finally broke, the voice was gone. The next day was unbearable. She tried to convince herself she'd dreamed it, but the exhaustion in her bones told her otherwise. The house felt different, listening, waiting. She called her daughter in London, but didn't mention the visitor. What could she say? Her daughter already worried she was becoming forgetful. That night, Margaret sat up with every light on, knitting needles clacking nervously in her hands. The clock ticked toward the hour. At 3:17, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the cottage. The tapping began immediately. "Let me in, Margaret." This time, the voice wasn't outside. It was inside the house. Her needles clattered to the floor. She stumbled to her feet, heart hammering. "Where are you?" she whispered. The voice was closer now, at the foot of the stairs. "I've missed you. Let me come up." She backed into her bedroom and slammed the door, fumbling the lock. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths. "You're not Henry," she cried, voice breaking. Silence. Then, a sound that made her blood turn cold. Slow, heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. She grabbed the bedside lamp and hurled it at the door, but the footsteps didn't falter. They reached the landing, paused just outside. The handle rattled once, twice, then stilled. For long minutes, nothing. She stood rigid, back against the wall, praying for dawn. At some point, exhaustion overtook her, and she sank into uneasy sleep. When she woke, the sun streamed through the curtains. Relief swept through her until she noticed the clock. 3:17, broad daylight, but the hands of the clock had stopped at the cursed hour. She stumbled to the door and froze. On the inside of her bedroom door, scratched deep into the wood, were 3 words: "Let me in." Margaret never spoke of it to anyone, but every night, without fail, the taps return. Always at 3:17, always waiting. And she knows, one night soon, she will be too tired, too weak, too lonely to resist. Story 4, The Thing in the Mirror. Eleanor had never liked the antique mirror. It had been her grandmother's, passed down through generations, framed in heavy oak, carved with twisting vines and staring faces. When her mother died, it became hers, along with the small countryside house she had once loved visiting as a child. She tried to ignore it at first. The mirror was too large to move easily, nailed into the wall above the mantel in the sitting room. Its glass was warped, the surface clouded with age, but it reflected faithfully enough. Her armchair, the clock, the faint flicker of the fire. At least that's what she thought. The first time she noticed something wrong, she was reading in the armchair, tea cooling at her side. Out of the corner of her eye, the reflection seemed delayed. She turned a page, and in the mirror, her hand lagged half a second behind. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, looked again. Everything was normal. She told herself she was tired. The next evening, she saw it again. This time it was her reflection's smile. She had chuckled at something on the radio, but the woman in the glass hadn't smiled. She sat still, heart pounding. And then, as she stared, the reflection smiled on its own. Her book slid from her lap. Eleanor stopped sitting in the armchair. She told herself it was silly, that old mirrors sometimes warped images, but she found excuses to avoid the room altogether. She ate in the kitchen, read in bed, left the sitting room cold and silent. Still, every time she passed the door, she felt the mirror waiting. One stormy night, the power went out. The cottage plunged into darkness. Eleanor lit candles and crept from room to room, checking windows. The storm rattled the shutters and howled through the chimney. She was halfway down the hallway when she heard it. A faint tap-tap from the sitting room. Her skin prickled. She edged toward the doorway and peeked inside. The fire was dead cold, but the mirror gleamed faintly in the candlelight. And in its surface, she saw movement. Her reflection was standing in the middle of the room, but Eleanor herself was not. She was still in the hall, frozen, holding her candle. The woman in the mirror raised her hand in greeting. The candle nearly slipped from Eleanor's grasp. She stumbled back, heart racing. Her reflection tilted its head, smiling faintly. Then it stepped closer, pressing its hand against the inside of the glass. "No," Eleanor whispered. She backed down the hall, shut herself in her bedroom, and didn't sleep until dawn. In the morning, she almost convinced herself it had been a dream. But when she finally returned to the sitting room, her heart sank. The mirror's glass bore faint smears, as though someone had pressed their palms against it. From then on, the reflection grew bolder. Sometimes Eleanor would catch it moving when she was still. Other times it would linger a second too long, staring after she had walked away. She began draping a sheet over the mirror. That helped, until one night, she found the sheet folded neatly on the floor, the mirror uncovered. Eleanor grew thinner, her sleep restless. Friends noticed her haggard look when she ventured into town, but she brushed off their concern. Who could she tell? Who would believe her? The worst came one evening in December. Snow pressed heavy against the windows, muffling the world in silence. Eleanor sat in her kitchen, refusing to look at the sitting room door. The clock struck midnight, and then she heard it. Her own voice, Eleanor. It came faintly, muffled, but unmistakable, from the sitting room. She sat frozen, every muscle tense. "Eleanor," the voice called again, this time louder. "Come here." Her throat closed. She couldn't breathe. Slowly, against every instinct, she crept to the doorway. The mirror glowed faintly in the firelight. Her reflection stood inside it, lips moving. "Come closer." She shook her head violently. "You're not me." The reflection's smile widened. "I could be. Just let me out." Eleanor stumbled backward. She fled up the stairs, slammed her bedroom door, shoved a chair beneath the handle. She huddled on her bed until dawn, when she finally crept back downstairs. The sitting room looked normal. The fire was cold. The mirror reflected only the empty room, but on the wooden floor in front of the mirror were wet footprints. Bare, human footprints, leading halfway across the room and then vanishing. Eleanor moved out of the cottage within the week. The mirror remained. She locked the door, left the key with the solicitor, and never looked back. But sometimes, when she closes her eyes at night, she swears she still sees it. The woman in the glass, smiling patiently, waiting for another chance to be free. Story 5. The Photograph. Margaret Ellis had never thought much about family portraits. They were simply mementos, moments frozen in time, destined to gather dust on mantels and hallway shelves. That's why she found it odd when her son Daniel insisted on setting up the old tripod after Sunday dinner. "Just one picture," he said, grinning as he adjusted the camera settings. "It's been years since we've all been together like this." Margaret sighed, but agreed. Daniel's wife, Claire, fetched their daughter from the kitchen. Her daughter-in-law, Anna, coaxed her shy little boy to stand still. Even her husband, Richard, who usually hated being photographed, managed a smile. They all crowded together in the living room, the fire flickering behind them. The camera flashed. Margaret blinked, her vision briefly swimming. When she looked again, Daniel was grinning, satisfied. "Perfect," he said. "I'll print it out tomorrow." The evening passed in laughter, warmth, and dishes clattering in the sink. By the time Margaret went to bed, she had almost forgotten about the picture entirely. The next morning, she found the photograph lying on the doormat, as if it had been delivered with the post. She frowned. Daniel hadn't had time to print anything yet. She'd spoken to him late the night before, and he'd promised to do it after work today. She bent down, picking it up carefully. The family portrait was warm to the touch, unnaturally so, as though it had just come from the printer, despite the morning chill. Her frown deepened when her eyes dropped to the bottom corner. Stamped neatly in black ink was a date, tomorrow's date. Her breath caught in her throat. Surely it was a mistake, a printing error of some kind. She turned the photograph over, expecting to see a company logo or developer stamp, but the back was blank, paper brand. No glossy finish, just a plain, smooth surface that felt oddly like skin beneath her fingertips. That evening, she showed the picture to Richard. He studied it, squinting. "It looks fine," he said finally. "Bit dark on the edges, maybe, but I don't see the problem." "The date," Margaret whispered. She pointed at the corner, but Richard only frowned. "What date? There's nothing there." She froze. The numbers stood out plain as day to her eyes. The 31st October 2025. But Richard looked at her as if she were imagining things. She forced a laugh, shaking her head. "Must be my eyes. Forget it." But when she slipped the photograph into her bedside drawer that night, she did not forget. The following day passed in restless anticipation. Every creak of the house, every ring of the phone set her heart racing. She couldn't stop staring at the clock. The photograph seemed to hum inside her drawer like a trapped wasp. By evening, her nerves were frayed. She gathered the family again, trying to act casual. "Why don't we all sit down for dinner together tonight?" she suggested. They obliged, though Richard gave her a puzzled look. She cooked their favorites: Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, anything to keep them around the table longer. For a while, it worked. The conversation flowed. Glasses clinked. The warmth of family filled the dining room. Margaret almost dared to hope the photograph had been a meaningless trick after all. And the phone rang. Daniel excused himself to answer it. A moment later, his voice came from the hallway. Strained, hurried. Margaret stood, her napkin falling to the floor. When she reached him, he was pale. "It's my office," he said. "Emergency meeting. They need me tonight." Her stomach dropped. She grabbed his arm. "Don't go." He laughed gently, prying her hand loose. "Mom, it's just work. I'll be back before you know it." She wanted to scream, to tell him about the photograph, the date, the way the paper had pulsed in her hands, like a heartbeat. But Richard and the others were watching. She couldn't. Hours later, she sat awake in bed, listening to the house settle. Richard snored softly beside her. She pressed the photograph to her chest, whispering desperate prayers. The phone rang again. Her blood turned to ice. She picked it up with trembling hands. On the other end, a voice she barely recognized as her daughter-in-law's choked out the words. There had been an accident. A lorry on the motorway. Daniel's car crushed beneath it. He hadn't survived. Margaret dropped the phone. Her gaze drifted to the photograph lying on the bedspread. For the first time, she noticed a detail she hadn't seen before. Daniel stood slightly apart from the others in the picture, his body outlined in a faint, unnatural shadow. The date in the corner had vanished. At the funeral a week later, Margaret kept the photograph hidden in her purse. The others didn't need to see. She didn't want to explain. But as she sat in the pew, numb with grief, she felt the picture warming again, searing against her palm. Slowly, fearfully, she pulled it out. A new date glistened in the corner. November 7th, 2025. And this time, it wasn't Daniel whose outline was shadowed. It was hers. Story 6. The third shift. Hospitals were always different at night. During the day, the wards bustled with chatter and footsteps, carts rattling along polished floors, the buzz of machines and fluorescent lights humming overhead. But when the sun sank and visiting hours ended, the corridors emptied into something else, something still and watchful. Nurse Emily Carter had worked nights at St. Aldwyn's Hospital for nearly 3 years. She was used to the quiet, the shadows stretching long across linoleum floors, the creak of the old building settling. She told herself she liked it, the way time seemed suspended, how her shift belonged to her alone. But lately, she'd begun to notice things she couldn't explain. It started with whispers, not the ordinary kind, but faint voices that seemed to rise from the vents or echo just a step behind her in the hall. She told herself it was the wind. She told herself she was tired. And then came room 319. The patient was listed as John Doe. No family, no visitors, no details beyond a sheet of sparse medical notes. His chart indicated he had died 2 days earlier after a stroke. But his bed was not empty. Emily discovered it during rounds on a Tuesday night, the graveyard shift. She'd pushed open the door to 319, expecting a vacant room, and instead found a man lying there, chest rising and falling steadily. Her breath caught. She glanced at the monitor. A pulse, blood pressure stable, perfect vitals. But it wasn't possible. She remembered the death notice. She had seen the paperwork herself. Moving closer, she studied him. Middle-aged, sallow skin, dark hair matted with sweat. His eyes were closed, his body completely still, except for the measured rhythm of his breathing. His wristband was still there, dated and marked deceased. Her stomach turned. The next morning, she brought it up to Dr. Haversham, the night supervisor. He was an older man with sunken eyes and a clipped, impatient voice. "There must be some mistake," Emily said carefully. "Room 319, he's alive. The monitor." "You must be mistaken," Haversham interrupted. He didn't even look up from his clipboard. "That patient is no longer under our care." "I saw him breathing." "You're tired. Long shifts blur things. Get some rest." His tone had steel beneath it, the kind that brooked no argument. "And don't mention it again." The conversation chilled her more than the discovery itself. That night, Emily went back. She told herself it was curiosity, but deep down she knew it was something heavier. A pull she couldn't resist. She slipped into room 319, just past midnight. The patient was still there. His eyes were open. They were milky, unfocused, but undeniably alive. He stared at her, lips parting as if to form words, though only a dry rasp escaped. Emily's hands trembled. She leaned closer. "Can you hear me?" The man's cracked lips moved. She caught fragments, whispers too faint to understand, except for one word that sent ice through her veins. "Buried." The following night, she searched the hospital records. Deep in the archives, behind layers of password protections she wasn't supposed to access, she found it. A program called Extended Retention Protocol. The files were clinical, detached. Certain patients, it seemed, were not released after death. They were kept. Not for research exactly, but for something else. Something the documents never fully explained. Words like continuity, resource management, and preservation appeared over and over. In one folder, she found a photograph. It was room 319, taken years ago. The man in the bed was different, but the wristband read the same word: deceased. On her next shift, Emily couldn't concentrate. Every shadowed corner felt alive, every sound amplified. When she finally reached 319, she found the bed empty. Panic surged. She searched the hall, the nurses' stations, the records. No transfer was logged, no discharge. It was as though he had never existed. But when she returned to her cart, a folded slip of paper rested on top, her name written across it. Hands shaking, she opened it. Inside, in scrawled handwriting, were 3 words: "Your next shift." Emily's chest tightened. She spun, scanning the hall. No one was there. The hospital was silent, except for the distant hum of the generator. That night, she didn't clock out. She didn't dare. Instead, she walked the halls until dawn, waiting for someone to explain, to reveal the cruel prank. No one did. When she finally left, she told herself she wouldn't come back. She would resign. She would walk away from St. Aldwyn's and whatever secrets it kept. But as she reached her car, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. For a heartbeat, she swore her own wrist glowed faintly beneath her sleeve. She pulled it back, trembling. There was a hospital band around her arm. Her name, her date of birth, and beneath it, the words stamped in bold black letters, deceased. Story 7, The Dollmaker's Debt. The little shop on Ashmere Lane had been there for as long as Clara could remember. Wedged between two shuttered storefronts, its crooked windows displayed rows of porcelain dolls, their glass eyes staring blankly through the dust-streaked glass. No one she knew ever went inside. Children whispered about it on their way home from school, daring each other to press their faces to the glass and run before the dolls blinked. Clara had never paid much attention until her sister vanished. It was a Sunday when Evelyn disappeared. She had gone to the market in town and never returned. The police searched. Posters were printed. Neighbors scoured the hedgerows and woods. But weeks passed with no trace. Clara was left with nothing but silence and a growing knot of dread that made it hard to breathe. Then one evening, while walking past Ashmere Lane on her way home, something caught her eye. One of the dolls in the crooked window had Evelyn's hair. Not just similar, exactly the same. The pale golden strands, the tiny curl at the ends, the way it had always refused to sit flat no matter how Evelyn brushed it. Clara froze. The doll's glass eyes seemed to glitter as the fading light caught them, and the mouth, painted in delicate red, was tilted in a way that looked horribly familiar. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But Clara's chest tightened with a terrible certainty. The doll was Evelyn. The next morning, Clara returned. The shop was open, though no one ever seemed to go in or out. A tiny brass bell chimed as she pushed the door, and the smell of varnish and something sweeter, something cloying, like rotting flowers, washed over her. The shelves were lined with dolls, dozens, maybe hundreds, each one sitting stiffly in perfect rows, their painted faces lit by the dim yellow lamps overhead. Some were small and childlike, others unnervingly lifelike, almost adult. Their glass eyes caught the light, seeming to follow her as she moved deeper into the shop. "May I help you?" The voice was dry as parchment. From the back room emerged a man in a long black coat, his white hair slicked flat, his skin waxy and stretched too tightly over sharp cheekbones. His hands were long and thin, the fingers stained with varnish. His eyes, though, were bright, unnaturally so, a startling blue that seemed to pierce right through her. "I was just looking," Clara said, though her voice shook. "Everyone says that," the dollmaker replied, lips curving into a humorless smile. "And yet, they always find something they can't leave behind." His gaze lingered on her, too long, too intently. Clara forced herself to step closer to the display. Her eyes landed on it, the doll with Evelyn's hair. Up close, it was even worse. The hair was real. She could see where it thinned unevenly at the parting. just as Evelyn's had. The face, though painted, carried some echo of her sister's expression, a softness around the mouth that stabbed Clara like a knife. Her hand trembled as she reached out. The doll maker's hand shot out faster than she thought possible, long fingers clamping around her wrist. "That one is not for sale," he said softly. Clara pulled away, heart hammering. "Where did you get it?" The smile widened, revealing teeth, too white, too even. "Each doll is a promise, my dear, a debt repaid. Nothing is taken that isn't freely given." And his words made no sense, yet carried a weight that chilled her blood. She fled the shop, but that night she couldn't sleep. When she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's face staring from behind the glass, lips painted into a scream she could not hear. The following nights, Clara returned. She watched the shop from across the street, waiting, studying. Sometimes she saw the doll maker moving behind the curtains, his shadow long and insect-like. Other times, she swore she saw the dolls themselves shift, their heads angling in new directions. Finally, she made her move. On the third night, just before midnight, she forced the lock and slipped inside. The air was suffocatingly still, the dolls sitting in their endless rows, silent witnesses to her trespass. She went straight to the shelf where Evelyn's doll sat. Her fingers shook as she lifted it, cradling it against her chest. For a moment, she felt relief until the doll's lips moved. For a moment, she felt relief until the doll's lips moved. A faint whisper, breathless and desperate. "Clara." She nearly dropped it. The glass eyes flicked toward hers, wet and glistening from the inside. Her sister was in there. "I wondered when you'd come back." The voice came from the shadows. The doll maker stepped forward, his eyes glowing in the dim light. "You can't free her," he said gently, almost kindly. "The binding is too deep. A soul for a soul. That is the bargain. That is the debt." Clara clutched the doll tighter, tears streaming. "What do you mean?" "To release her," he said, stepping closer. "Someone must take her place." The dolls on the shelves shifted, heads turned. Rows of glass eyes gleamed in the dark, watching. Clara backed toward the door, Evelyn's doll warm in her arms, whispering her name again and again. She understood now what had happened to the missing children, the vanished townsfolk. They hadn't been taken, they had been traded. And the doll maker was waiting for her to decide. Clara ran, bursting into the night, with the doll clutched to her chest. She didn't stop until she reached home. But when she finally set Evelyn down, the painted mouth curved into a smile. And in the window's reflection, Clara swore she saw her own eyes, glass, unblinking, staring back at her. Story 8. The Shadow That Stayed. The party had ended hours ago. Anna was the last one awake, wandering through the wreckage of wine glasses and half-crushed canapé plates in the living room. The house was finally silent, save for the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional creak of old floorboards as the place settled into sleep. Her friends had left in a flurry of laughter and goodbyes, the last car headlights vanishing down the lane just after midnight. She had waved them off, exhausted but happy, until she stepped back inside and noticed something strange. The shadows hadn't gone with them. At first, she thought it was the wine. Maybe the candlelight had warped her vision. But as she turned off lamps one by one, the darkness didn't behave as it should. On the living room wall, stretched across the faded wallpaper, lingered the silhouettes of her friends. There was Sophie with her champagne glass, Mark leaning lazily against the mantel, and David perched in the corner chair. They were outlines, black shapes with no detail, but frozen exactly as they had been when she'd last seen them. Anna rubbed her eyes and switched the light back on. The shadows didn't move. They shouldn't even exist with the lamp burning bright. Her stomach tightened. She tried to laugh it off. "Just tricks," she muttered, gathering plates and carrying them to the kitchen. But every time she re-entered the living room, the silhouettes were still there, watching. At 2 a.m, she gave up and went to bed, shutting the door behind her. She told herself she'd deal with it tomorrow, when daylight would make the world ordinary again. But the house didn't sleep. Around 3, she woke to the sound of muffled footsteps in the hall. She froze, ears straining. They were soft, dragging footsteps, too many of them, moving slowly past her bedroom door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She reached for her phone, but it lay across the room on the dresser. She stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, until silence returned. When she finally dared to peek out, the hallway was empty. But on the walls, shadows shifted. Long, thin figures gliding silently across the plaster, though no one walked there. The next morning, Anna opened all the curtains, flooding the house with daylight. She checked every corner, every surface, convincing herself it had been a dream. But the shadows were still there. They no longer clung to the walls in the exact poses of her friends. Now, they stood straighter, clearer, like people waiting, patient and motionless. By noon, she called Sophie. "Hey," Anna forced a laugh. "Weird question. Do you feel normal after last night?" "Normal?" Sophie sounded puzzled. "Sure. Why?" "No reason. Just checking." But Anna could hear it. Something faint in the background of the call. A second voice, whispering just beneath Sophie's words. She hung up quickly. Over the next few days, the shadows multiplied. Where there had once been 4, now there were 6, then 7. Guests who had never attended the party appeared as black shapes along her walls. Some were tall, stooped figures, others small, hunched, childlike forms. They never moved when she looked directly at them. But sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, she caught them shifting positions, closer than before. At night, she heard them whisper, a dry, scraping sound, like dead leaves dragged across pavement. She couldn't make out the words, but the intent was clear. They wanted her attention. By the 5th night, Anna hadn't slept. She sat curled on the sofa, with every lamp blazing, her eyes darting to each corner. "Why are you here?" she whispered. The shadows rippled. One detached itself from the wall, sliding forward across the floor. It stretched impossibly thin, then thickened, forming a humanoid shape just a few feet away. its head tilted. Her own shadow, cast by the lamp, twitched in response. And then, without her moving, her shadow raised its arm. Anna screamed. She ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but the wood was swollen and stuck. Behind her, the lamp bulbs popped one by one, plunging the house into heavy darkness. Dozens of shadows swarmed the walls, overlapping, growing darker, thicker. They were everywhere, pressing closer, closing in. She felt the temperature drop as a cold hand brushed the back of her neck. Her shadow slid free of her feet. It stood before her now, identical in shape, but darker, denser, its eyes two hollow pits of black. And when it smiled, every shadow in the house smiled with it. Anna was never seen again. When her sister came to check on her a week later, the house was locked tight, silent as stone. But inside, on the living room wall, new shapes had joined the others. One of them, unmistakably, was Anna, forever frozen, her outline pressed flat against the wallpaper. And at night, when the house creaks and the street grows still, neighbors swear they see flickers of movement inside. The guests left long ago, but their shadows stayed. Story 9. Emily's Haunted House, Manchester, UK. My name is Emily. I'm from Manchester, England. I live in an old Victorian house with my family. For a long time, I felt that something wasn't right in that house. But things got worse a few months ago. It started with simple noises. Footsteps in the hallway late at night, when everyone was asleep. Doors opening and closing on their own. And sudden cold drafts that made the whole place feel frozen. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But then I began to see things. One night, while I was heading upstairs, I noticed a dark shadow standing at the end of the corridor. It wasn't moving, just staring. Another night, I woke up to see a woman dressed in black, standing near my bed. She whispered something I couldn't understand, and when I screamed, she vanished. My parents didn't believe me at first, until my little brother told them he had also seen the dark man walking up the stairs. That was when we all realized we weren't alone in that house. Story 10. Jack's Night Ride, Brooklyn, New York. My name is Jack. I work as a taxi driver in Brooklyn. I've seen all kinds of people during my night shifts, but there's one ride I'll never forget. It was around 2 a.m. when a woman waved me down near an old bridge. She was wearing a long white dress, and her face looked pale under the streetlight. She asked me, in a soft voice, to take her to an address not far away. During the ride, she stayed completely silent. I kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, but her eyes were fixed on the road ahead. When we finally arrived, I turned to tell her we had reached her stop. But the back seat was empty. Shocked, I looked around, and that's when I noticed something chilling. The seatbelt was still buckled, as if someone had just been sitting there. I later discovered that the address she gave me was the site of a fatal accident years ago, where a woman in white had lost her life. Since that night, I never look at my rear-view mirror the same way again. Story 11. Sophia's Classroom, Berlin, Germany. My name is Sophia, and I'm a high school teacher in Berlin. The school building I work in is over 100 years old, and many people say it carries a strange history. I never believed in ghosts until one evening. I stayed late grading papers in the teacher's lounge. The halls were quiet, and the whole building felt empty. Suddenly, I heard the sound of children laughing and running in the corridor. I stepped out, expecting maybe some students had sneaked back in, but the hallway was completely empty. Later, while I was gathering my things, I noticed a child standing at the end of the corridor. He looked about 8 years old, wearing old-fashioned clothes. I called out to him, but he didn't answer. He just stared at me, then vanished when I blinked. The next morning, I told a colleague about what I saw. She turned pale and whispered that decades ago, during the war, several children had died in that very building when it was bombed. Some teachers still claim to hear their laughter echoing at night. Since that day, I never stay late at school anymore. Story 12. Nurse Olivia's Night Shift. Boston, USA. My name is Olivia. I work as a nurse in a hospital in Boston. Night shifts are always exhausting, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. Around 3 a.m., I was walking down the corridor to check on a patient when I noticed a woman in a hospital gown standing at the end of the hall. She looked weak, pale, and barefoot. I thought maybe she was a patient who had left her room, so I hurried toward her. But as I got closer, she simply vanished. 1 second she was there, the next second, gone. I froze, my heart pounding. Later, when I told one of the older nurses about what I saw, she just sighed and said, "You're not the first to see her. Years ago, a patient died on that floor. She still wanders these halls. Since then, every time I walk that corridor at night, I feel like someone is quietly following me."